Morning everyone who's joining us for today's webinar, how to really measure the impact of your learning strategy. Really excited to be able to introduce this session and our fantastic speakers, Ian Blackburn and Matty Hogarth. Before I do that, just a couple of things to make you all aware of. Firstly, the session is being recorded, so we will share the recording afterwards and make sure you have access to that and can rewatch and share at your leisure. And also just to make you aware, we really want you to kind of participate, ask any questions you've got throughout the session. So have a think, please do drop some questions into the Q&A box. We've got some time at the end to go through your questions. So hopefully we'll get to all of those and get those answered for you. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Ian and Matty to introduce themselves and get started.
Thanks, Laura. I'm Ian Blackburn, Head of Analytics here at Thrive, and also Head of the Data Lab service, which we will briefly introduce to you towards the end of today's session. And of course, joined by Matty. Matty, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name is Matty Hogarth. I don't work for Thrive. I am the Learning and Development Manager for our technology and our product group of people at Bally's Interactive. So just to give you a little bit of an overview about who we are and what we do. So Bally's Interactive, we are the digital arm of the world famous Bally's Corporation. So we bill ourselves on the fact that we're born to entertain. So we are a sports betting and gaming company. We have tens of millions of players around the world across multiple brands. And as you can see there, we're involved in free-to-play games, sports betting, fantasy sports, and iCasino as well.
Thank you. So this is where we have a quick poll. I think hopefully this works. So just really want to get a bit of a feel for where everyone's at, just to understand really who our audience is today, just to get a bit of a feel for where you're at with your learning sort of activity impact measurement. Good, thank you. It's good to see. This actually doesn't render very well, does it? We'll have to make these a bit wider. Okay, good. Yes, a nice mix. We see that coming through. So this is quite common when we do these kinds of webinars. This is a lot of the reason why we've sort of created this topic today and why we really want to work with people like yourselves and why we started working with teams like those at Bally's, because we want to really get to that stage where we're changing things and really measuring the impact. And good to see that there's a couple of people dropping in, combining different data sources outside the LMS and XP. We'll touch on that a little bit today. It's super important that we think along those lines. So yeah, great to see that some people starting to get to that, and hopefully seeing some success, or perhaps today looking for some help and getting to the next stages. That's brilliant, thank you. We'll leave that. Can we just leave that up, Laura? I think we can probably leave it up just in case people join late. I'll just move it over to the other screen though.
Yeah, that's fine.
Alrighty. So just a little bit on this. So there are loads of different statistics you can find around data science projects and insights. Picked a couple from Gartner that are fairly recent, and some of the predictions they made around the fact that a lot of the insights that are delivered won't actually deliver business outcomes. That's quite common. We see that a lot of time. People consume data, but actually does it make a real difference? Perhaps not. Now, one of the big reasons for this is actually largely down to a lack of a real comprehensive plan. So, it's not necessarily because you don't have the tools or the processes or the people in place. It's a lack of understanding of, what you should do and why you should do it, and all of the various bits in between. So that's really a big focus for us today, is helping you trying to create that structure to be successful. So we want to focus on ways to get to the real problems that you have to solve, how they will actually connect to the organizational goals, getting buy-in and support from the various stakeholders, and obviously the challenges that come in addressing that, and of course a bit of prioritization as well. One of the big things that we see people fail with is actually not delivering enough as far as quick wins are concerned, when you kind of have these big ambitious projects in place and a bit of a lack of momentum. So just over to you, Matty, just to introduce a little bit about the work we've done together so far.
Yeah, so I'll just tell you a little bit about how we came to work with Data Lab. So we initially began as a Thrive LXP customer, so their learning platform provider for us. We partnered with them in September, so fairly new to our organisation, and quite quickly, as part of that rollout, brought in Content Club as well. So their brilliant suite of e-learning material that they offer. And we launched after our implementation phase. We went live in the end of January this year. And we quite quickly found that we had all of this new engagement data, we had all of this new learning data, we had all of this new activity going on in a bit of a kind of positive frenzy that we've not had before. And we didn't have the resource for anybody to look at that and think about what that might mean, how we tap into that to make that valuable for our business. I think when you're in the space of, you're starting out and thinking about how do I measure learning, or what should I be doing, what's good practice, there's this cottage industry, I feel like, on LinkedIn now of, these learning influencers, I kind of call them, where that they tell you, it's almost like they have this silver bullet in mind. If you do X, Y, Z, and that will solve all your problems. But usually it involves a lot of resource in terms of personnel and time. And it's not scalable. So we had all of this information that we could sit down and analyze, but how do we factor that into our everything else we've got to do? We have this huge stakeholder network, and we've got all of these projects that we're trying to deliver, and then we're going to go and explore this data and extract future opportunities that's then going to ultimately increase our workload, because it's going to give us potential value to deliver to the business. So we had that realization quite early on. So then we started thinking about, initially, very honestly, we thought about what's the product that will help us tackle some of that, go through that data. Is there a dashboard we could build, or is there a reporting tool that we could look at? And I think that conversation lasted for about an hour with us all in the room. And then we realized, well, actually, there isn't a dashboard we could build. We kept putting Post-its on a wall and moving around. What might we want to see? What would be valuable for us to look at? And it was different by audience, by seniority level, by everywhere in the business, and was changing as new objectives came in every day. So then we started thinking about, well, actually, it's probably more of the people that we need to go and find that can help us do that. We don't have the luxury of having internal headcount. We don't have that resource available to us. So is there a partnership that we could form that would help us dig into all of that data and make it meaningful for our business? Because it seemed a huge shame that we had all of this new engagement to not harness it and do something with it. And that completely coincidentally led us to Data Lab, as well as our LXP and Content Club review.
Thank you. That's a brilliant intro to that, Matty. Thank you very much for that. So, yeah, when we started working together, one of the things I really push for with sort of customers you've worked in is really to kind of get in a room and workshop things. Now, during of course the sort of big body of the pandemic, we're doing a lot of this online, and a massive shout out to anybody who's used Miro before. That kind of got me through some of the workshop stuff, being able to collaborate. But of course, we were able to actually, I think this is probably the first one that we'd managed to do face-to-face post-presentation, which was a really great feeling. But really, the workshops are designed on trying to create an environment where we can sort of create a process and that sort of really aims to clearly define the problems that we have, how we're going to measure them, what opportunities there are, and really try and challenge the understanding and the teams have. And really, I kind of play a bit of an idiot in the room for most of it, where I'm able to kind of force the sort of the customer, who are really the subject matter experts, to really explain through the problems and process in it, and it often helps kind of uncover quite a lot of information that perhaps not everyone is always privy to, or don't have the same understanding of. So in a nutshell, the workshops really focus on trying to identify what objectives the business has, or the organization as a whole. What are the problems that exist in trying to achieve those objectives, the metrics that actually exist there, what data is actually available, or what do we need, and then the things that we can actually do to change them. So by the end of these sessions, the idea is that we have a team that has all contributed. So it's not just the most senior person in the room coming up with the objectives, which I'm sure many of you have experienced, and you sort of just get on with what you're sort of told to do. We whittle down a set of ideas, group problems together, and really have some kind of focus to work on to move forward into sort of future sessions as forms the basis of what we sort of consider a bit of a data strategy. So in the first session, we sort of had two, and they really address sort of two different sort of scenarios. So session one is really just getting to know Bally's as a business and really focusing on understanding that. So initially what I asked kind of every individual in the room to do is to really identify what problems affect them. So within the team that we had there, and we had, I forget the number of people with different elements of sort of HR and L&D in a room together. And the reason I ask people to, and I encourage you to try and do this, is ask them to write down the problems that affect you, is that depending on where you work, the problems that exist in the business, people will perceive them or experience them in a different way. And often that kind of helps you get to the actual root cause of the problem. Later on, we start to categorize these things. That's kind of stage two. So we have all of these different problems and what similarities they have. So you might find some top level categories like communication or career development, for example, become things that are focus points, that within those there are sort of other symptoms of these problems that you have, and actually it's the overarching problem is actually around communication rather than these sort of specific experiences that people have. Once we have that,
talk a little bit around that, Ian.
Of course, yes.
I think from the L&D side, this was a very interesting experience for us, because when we were walking into this session, what I was fully expecting, the way I pitched this to my team, was we'll get around a table and we'll talk about what we need Data Lab to give us. So what do we need in terms of data, in terms of reports, in terms of insight? And then when we got there and you say, what's important to you? I remember this feeling, everybody looking at me like, what's he on about? Why is he asking us what's important? That's not what you told us we were here to do. And actually, I really value just asking your team members to write down individually, without discussing, on Post-its individually what's important to you at the moment, and putting that on a wall. Because what we found was that there was a heap of stuff that we all look after in our business that we don't bring to the central table because we can solve the problems ourselves. So it's not, oh, I don't need your help, I don't need to collaborate, therefore I don't talk to you about it. So what we found when we collectively put on a board what's important to us, it was far wider. It was a much bigger picture than I think we actually realized, just by that languaging when you said what's important as opposed to what are the problems. Yeah. We got a very different picture and a very different type of conversation very, very quickly. And it's the kind of conversation we would encourage stakeholders to have. If we were doing learning needs analysis, that's exactly the kind of process I guess we'd work through. But I think it's rare that learning teams do this. We're usually kind of solutionizing rather than trying to explore our own importance and prospect and potential value. So this was really, really valuable for our team.
Yeah, no, it's good. And it's funny you should say, because I guess I had this session sort of up my sleeve, full disclosure on that, on that first day, because again, I'd been given a bit of an agenda to work through from your team. It's like I wasn't totally sure how it was going to land, and but it was quite clear. I think there was a couple of people within the room who sort of spoke to me over we had a short break in the morning, who came to me with specific issues that they were trying to resolve, and it kind of made me realize that actually there's the alignment wasn't necessarily there. Like you said, everyone was sort of solving their problems in silos. They were doing it by themselves. That was fine, but actually there's a real opportunity to collaborate and really
we were missing opportunity massively.
Yeah,
we were missing a lot of stuff that we could go after that was low-hanging fruit, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, for sure. And it helps that your team was highly engaged in the process as well, and really just took it and ran with it, which really helped. So appreciate that little segue. I think it's really helpful. So like we said, we want to talk about the data that we had. That's really important whenever you're trying to make changes to things. The types of questions you need to start asking yourself, what does the data tell us? What data do we actually have? Because it's all well and good trying to implement these strategies, and it's a big thing that I've seen people fail with, is go and implement all these tools and technologies, but not actually understand what data actually exists. And unfortunately, I had to witness historically some customers invest in a lot of expensive technology and probably have to have quite expensive conversations when they realize that the thing they actually want to do doesn't exist, and the data perhaps it simply isn't there. Simple problems like that not addressed. early on. The next bit is always really fun, is really to try to challenge the team. So why does it actually matter? Why do these things that you're saying about actually matter? Why do we care? Why does the business care? Why does L&D care? Why do your learners care? Start challenging all of these things and really putting pressure on people to explain themselves. Because again, you might experience that problem, but is it really a problem that everyone is seeing? Is everyone feeling that way? Where's the information that tells us? Is it a problem? Do we have some research? I think fortunately, Matthew, I remember, is it the Pulse survey, and that there was a couple of bits that you actually had and data points that actually were helpful in this scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what I assumed this conversation would go down the avenue of was around compliance. Yeah. Because we knew compliance training affects absolutely everybody. It's mandatory, it's regulatory. So of course that's going to, if we're ranking importance, that's going to come out on top. And it is important because we're talking about de-risking our business. But what was fascinating, just asking that question, why is it important? Just the trade-offs between the team of what's important for my stakeholder group. Is it important to others? And we ended up with this trade-off discussion going on around a lot of the stuff we were deeming as important initially was around problem solving. We were trying to fix things that we knew were issues or difficulties for our people. But actually what ended up outranking quite significantly as the discussion continued was around opportunities that we've not really gone after, that if we could get our arms around them and land them properly, the potential value would far outstrip those problems we were trying to solve. Because I think often, if you're L&D internally in a big organization in particular, your inbox is a never-ending to-do list. So you kind of come up with this mental prioritization matrix that you try and work through, but essentially you're firefighting most of the time. You're solving problems, you're giving access to things, you're helping people find their way to learning and development opportunities. But what you're very rarely doing is sitting down and thinking about, what are we not doing at all? What have we not touched that is important to us that we could add value in? And some of the potential opportunities that came out of that discussion were really significant.
Absolutely. And then really to round off the sort of the session there, so once we kind of have, and again, it's perhaps hard for you to all visualize, but at this point we have a wall full of categorized post-it notes with ideas, problems, metrics, reasons why it's important. And at this point we're allowed to start really brainstorming on the things we could actually deliver. We talk about those opportunities, where are the opportunities to really challenge this and change things? And we have at this point a wall of ideas where you can use to reference. And to finally round this off, because of course you're normally in a big room full of people, there's a ton of ideas, you can't do all of these things at once. We had a little voting session where we have, I like to do sort of two types of votes. Again, you don't have to use this method, but I find it's one, quite a nice relaxed way of doing it, and secondly, a good way to collaborate and all sort of collectively agree on what has the most value. So you have your $1 million votes, where everyone gets one, and it's the, if this was your money, how would you spend it? What would you have invested in? And then everyone gets kind of 2 or 3 secondary votes, which really help you decide between the different ideas where there's sort of multiples that are popular. And it's not to say that you discount some of the ideas, but if this is about prioritization, if you're looking to go, right, we want to plan for the next 12 months, what can we actually focus on and deliver real value with, rather than trying to do a little bit of everything and not really making loads of progress? And you look at that statistic from Gartner, about only 20% delivering real value. It's the kind of thing where trying to do too much really lets you down, and actually can the types of insights that you present or the changes you make are perhaps not as impactful as they could be if you really focused on specific things.
Yeah, and just picking on, I can see Kath in the chat box there saying, struggling to engage peers in data. We were the same, that we had energy, like our stakeholders, they were asking us for data, but what they were asking for was what I call vanity metrics. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of stuff that was based around completions or who was doing what. And I guess it made them feel better that they had a view of what their people were doing in the L&D space. But my challenge with that was it's not actually telling you anything worthwhile. Just because somebody has consumed a piece of content or done some kind of training course doesn't mean that they've actually improved in performance at all. So taking the idea of what report or data do you need off the table momentarily, and working through these questions in sequential order without knowing what was coming next. So really focusing on the importance first, then thinking about categories, rather than trying to build the overall picture straight away, really helped us get our thoughts in order and identify some, you know, truly value-adding opportunities before we even thought about, okay, what data might we use to bring our stakeholders along that journey, because they generally work in problems as well. They're thinking about what problems are we trying to solve. So it really helps us talking in their language as opposed to just some kind of random L&D dashboards.
Very good. And yeah, thanks for answering Kath's question as well. Appreciate the engagement with this, Kath. So session 2, things, I guess, changed a little bit. Now, what we did in session 1 was really valuable because we then, as a group, had a real core understanding of you know, what we could go after. Now, the thing that changed was that the business came up with a list of objectives related to this wider organizational goal. Now, most of you on the listening today will have probably seen this at some point, where, you know, the most senior people in the organization create a set of objectives they want based on whatever information they have, and everyone else has to kind of work with it. Now, the good thing about session 1 was that we'd identified some problems that we could connect to those organizational objectives, and that's the key piece here, is that actually being able to, whatever you're doing in L&D, needs to really be connected to what the business wants. So we should be thinking always about, you know, how are we improving the organization, not just simply, you know, perhaps the tick box compliance or very learning specific goals. You know, we should be thinking about how do we make improvements to the organization through L&D. And now it's fair to say that L&D is often not the only reason why these things change, but it's what contributing factor can L&D have, and having a really clear structure was helpful. Now, of course, the senior teams created these things. So one of the things we really needed to think about was, you know, who are the players in the game here? So who are our key stakeholders that we need to involve? Now, these people are in different categories. Of course, you have your learners. They are an important stakeholder, the people you're trying to influence, but also, you know, the people who sign the checks, the managers, the ops leaders, you know, perhaps there's very specific departmental people who need to be considered and involved at some stage. You know, here what you're trying to build is a strategy, and there should be some ownership heavily involved in this, so really we try and maintain that buy-in along the way. So a part of our session 2 is really identifying that, and then, of course, bringing those ideas from session 1 into those objectives and connecting it. So now we had kind of a stage where we have objectives, we have, again, our problems or what's important, the metrics that we knew existed and those baselines, and then those opportunities to develop. You know, we had kind of a list of those, and it's really putting those in together, taking our priorities, and then going, right, now we can actually put this forward as a business case. So that really kind of led us to putting everything together, and we kind of came up with what is, I appreciate perhaps at the moment a little crude, but it's really just trying to help you visualize this, because I appreciate we've sort of talked a lot, and although we have those questions, it's some fundamental things to think about. Now, you might not think that the way that we conducted these workshops is the way that you would do it. You might not think that the questions that you might ask might be different, or your situation is different. However, there are some fundamental things that I think personally are pretty ubiquitous in all of these types of strategies. You know, we should be starting with objectives at the top. You know, we need to identify the problems or what's important. Who the players in the game are. So these are the different stakeholders. So these are the people in L&D who are actually doing the work. Maybe if you have to create content, it could be that someone in IT has to do something. It might be that part of the problem you've identified isn't solved by, you know, creating some new content or a new training program. You know, that is sometimes the case. You know, it's not always a new piece of content that will save the day. But recognizing who those people are. And then you'll see we have this kind of continuous loop. And now this is where the culture has to change. You know, we have to get into this mindset of testing, measuring, trying something new. So those development opportunities, test it, measure it. You know, does it need changing? Iteratively, continuing to do that, and just becoming more experimental. Now, the problem that I've seen personally a lot, and I see in the wider sort of industry, is that actually people will jump into, hey, we see this problem, let's build some content, let's do some training, or we need to buy a new tool, or we need a data warehouse to capture everything, or a learning record store, if those of you familiar with XAPI. Unfortunately, that doing that doesn't address all of the earlier conversation, and it also doesn't consider the challenges, which you can see at the bottom. Now, this is a thing I think that we perhaps don't generally spend enough time doing, and it's the thing that derails a lot of these projects 3-6 months down the line, is that, what could actually stop this being successful? We've identified what we want to solve, we know how it connects to the business, we know who we need to talk to, and we have the data and we have the opportunity to develop. But you have to ask yourself, what stops this from happening? What could derail it? What are those things? It could be that one of the stakeholders doesn't buy into it and rejects the proposal. Of course, that's a big, starter that can derail everything. It might be later down the line where actually there's a change in process or change in product, perhaps something that you perhaps aren't aware of. What alternatives can you put in place in the event of some event happening that could be predictable? Now, of course, there are certain things that you can't always predict, but you should really aim to outline as many of these challenges that you can and have some contingency where possible in place so that you continue to work on the project. Some of these things will take months to really see the value, certainly the longer term goals, so you have to be prepared for your world to change in some way during that time. So Matty, I know you have a really good example of kind of really where something that you've seen straight away, so I think it's good to perhaps segue onto you at this point.
Yeah, so just to kind of provide a bit of context about what we did in regards to what you said, Ian. So session 1 was very much about us getting out of our heads all of the things that are important to us, and agreeing some priorities is essentially what we did in session 1. So it was more kind of blue sky thinking session, I guess. Session 2 was more around, okay, now let's introduce some of the business reality. What's the corporate strategy? How do we link that to what our priorities are? Is there a link? And I remember, we had all of those down the left-hand side of a board with a load of Post-its. And then we had on the right-hand side, well, what information or data or measurements would that spit out for us? And then what learning opportunities could we explore as a result of that new insight? And then in the middle, we listed all of the challenges that we had. And it was pointless committing to anything until we knew we could move those challenges or influence them. Otherwise, you were going to get nowhere. You were going to sink a resource, which again was not something we'd really considered before. We were very much, we knew the problem and we knew where we were going to get to, but having that really focused discussion about where the barriers might be first was really, really useful. And I think there were 2 things that really came out in that session for us. One was around recognizing the value of our position, that very few people in your business have a completely holistic view of what's going on. Even the more senior, / important people, they are tasked with a very specific set of metrics or deliverables, and that's what they're looking at. Whereas we have the luxury of being a central function. So we had a lot of view of the organization that a lot of people didn't. So recognizing that because the corporate strategy hasn't landed on something as a priority that we had, didn't automatically render it invaluable. There were lots of objectives that we'd identified that didn't directly connect to the corporate strategy. And that was a challenge that we still agreed that we would pursue because we had the insight of it being value add to the organization. So really partnering with our business rather than just being order takers. And the second thing that came out quite quickly of this, because not one of our objectives was a specific L&D problem that we could solve. There was nothing there that was specific or complete or just related to L&D. And I think if you're doing L&D right, that should be the case.
Yes.
If you can genuinely solve a problem with just giving content or a training course, you've probably not understood your problem properly. Yeah. So we had what we quickly had in that session was a conversation around controlling the controllables. Mm-hmm. So understanding that we were not the only players in this game, and that there were lots of people that needed to be involved and that we needed to bring with us and have on board, but also that we couldn't do everything. We couldn't take that to-do list and push it forward. A lot of our objectives, we were just in an advisory capacity, or we were giving new data for somebody else to then take on and do something with. So a really specific example that we had in our organization, one of our overarching goals this year was around this idea of scaling talent in our organization, because we've gone through quite a lot of mergers and acquisitions. There's a lot of moving pieces going on. There's a lot of new roles and hiring, and we wanted to scale high-level talent with limited resource. And that's a huge problem that, hiring managers need to get involved in, resourcing needs to be involved in, talent needs to be involved in, as well as learning and development. it's not as straightforward. We want highly talented individuals, we'll just put them through a load of learning. However, one of the things we could control was putting people through learning and through the right learning. So what we initially looked at was learning engagement. That was metrics that we've not had before, true learning engagement, that the partnership with Thrive could give us as part of the new platform and the partnership with Data Lab. So we decided to look at, we built, like heat maps and things like that. Who was learning? What were they learning? When were they learning? How were they learning? And what were the barriers or their challenges to accessing the right things? And that gave us a lot of insight really quickly. One of the things that came out of a problem was the idea that in just some parts of the organization, there just wasn't learning engagement. People were too busy. People couldn't find what they needed, or they had in their minds other priorities than developing themselves. So until we solved that problem, there was nothing else we were going to do in the learning space that was going to add any value, because people weren't engaging with that stuff. So we went after that first, and as part of the test and measure, that some of the things we looked at, that we monitored as part of, are people engaging with our stuff? How are they doing it? One of them was cost per learning hour, because we recognized if we want to make true inroads in this space, we're going to need to spend money. A lot of people want L&D for free, but it costs money to do it properly. And we had a limited budget. So we looked at what's our average cost per learning hour, and could we repurpose some of that cost to help us build campaigns that would help solve that problem. So we started to monitor our cost per learning hour, which we've not done before. And through a few tweaks of what we put in front of people, when, what time of day, what type of content, how tone of voice we spoke to them, testing and playing with these different tactics and measuring the impact that had on the engagement level and the overall cost per learning hour, spat out a lot of opportunities for us in terms of who do we go after, with what, and how we measure that output. So just by looking at that one metrics of cost per learning hour, since we launched the LXP, so in a 2-month period, we halved the cost of our per learning hour. We had lots of partnerships with lots of really great resource, but people were finding that they couldn't find it, or they didn't know where to search, or it wasn't in the most consumable way for them to palette it, or they didn't know it was relevant to them. So just by playing with that idea of the different learning engagement measures we had, monitoring the cost per learning hour, testing, changing, measuring the output, identifying the different campaign opportunities, we had a very tangible ROI of halving our cost per learning hour, because our engagement significantly went up. So then, your traditional tougher customers, you've now got people in finance going, what, you're doing 50% more with your existing budget? How has that happened? And then they want to get involved and go into those deeper, broader problems, because you've shown real ROI, the real impact that just something as straightforward as changing and monitoring and testing the way that you engage with your learners can add. It was really, really powerful. And that was only 2 months in.
Yeah, it's really good. And it's the key thing there is you had a baseline as well. I think that's the one really important piece here, is that finding your baseline metric to start from has to be, again, one of the first things you do. And that's that first test and measure step, is that what does it look like right now? So before you've done anything, and then for everything you do, have we improved, or have we got worse, or by how much have we improved by? Does it meet our expectations, based on our assumptions? You can start asking all of those questions, and is that mindset shift. And really great anecdote there, Matty. And it's always nice to get ROI values back, because like you said, it does get those stakeholders from other key parts of the business, and particularly finance, much more engaged with what you're trying to do. So there are a few pitfalls with learning analytics data in general, things to watch out for. So I thought it'd be good to run through just a few of them. There is probably there's a much larger list, I suppose, but some ones that certainly I think are important. Firstly, a dashboard isn't going to change the world. I think we do need to get out of the mindset that reporting and just data in lots of charts is going to necessarily tell you anything other than, Matthew referred to the vanity metrics, just bits of adoption or with the platform, you really have to use visualizations with a purpose to tell a story. So do think about that. And part of this planning really does help that, having those conversations first and understanding what you want to show, and then using the visualization to make it easier to understand is what your objective should be. Metrics on the L&D metrics on their own don't have limited value. Again, we referred to, if it's just L&D data that you're using, you probably haven't understood the problem. To paraphrase Matty there, I think that's a perfect way of saying it. If you're not looking at metrics outside of L&D, then there's probably some work to do. Don't interpret data to mean more than what it is. And Matty, I know you came up with this one, and it's really good, right? It's just because you see some completion data here doesn't mean that it's anything other than that you've got, say, some adoption here, or it doesn't mean that because one audience that you've done this training with, that will be the same for everyone, every group. If you're delivering the training to, say, marketing, doesn't mean that your software engineers are going to respond in exactly the same way. So, tailor what you're doing to the audience and test in every scenario.
And I think the big one that I see rife in our industry in terms of don't make data mean more than what it's telling you is just because somebody likes something doesn't mean it added any value at all. We're very good at happy sheets in L&D, and we convince ourselves if we send the happy sheet a month down the line that we're somehow measuring performance or impact. And you're not. You're still just asking people what they thought of something, and that's the only information it's giving you. So that's what I mean when I say don't make data mean more than what it's telling you. You've got to measure. If you want a specific bit of insight, that's what you have to measure. You can't take a different data stream and make that mean something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've touched on this a little bit already. More content isn't always the solution. Sometimes it is that advisory role that you need to play. You are in L&D, it said more central than perhaps you might think to the business. You're not working in isolated silo, you're often cross-functional and having to support lots of different areas of the business, and it gives you a slightly more holistic view and that perhaps some teams might have, and through the work and the research that you can do, you can advise on other areas. Don't always default to creating more or spending money on content. It's not always the solution, for sure. And don't avoid taking risks. I think this is one of the things I'm really quite passionate about, is actually sometimes failure is pretty good. Understanding that something doesn't work and that you've tried and you can say, look, we tried this, it doesn't work, we don't want to do that anymore, is really good. I have seen lots of examples where the same process is used year on year on year, and no one ever really answers the question whether it's actually working. This is particularly true of compliance, actually, in that people deliver compliance training, it ticks a box, but does it actually change the thing you're trying to make people compliant in? Does your health and safety training actually reduce the number of accidents? Have you even tested that? Those are kind of some simple quick wins you can do if you're in that space. And on to quick wins, that is really important. Some of these bigger blue sky thinking ideas that you've got will take time. It's going to take you a while to see real change, and it's you might have to review these things over months and months, but look for those opportunities, those little insights that you can share and keep those stakeholders bought in and keep them engaged with what you're doing, get them asking questions of you and the what next and what about this. That's what we want to get back from the people we're trying to influence here.
Can I just talk a little bit about this as well? Because this is my favourite one. And I think it talks a little bit to what Kath talked about earlier as well, with difficulty with bringing stakeholders along in the data space, because they might not get it, particularly if they've never worked with N&D in that way. If you're through, despite the lack of all of your good intentions and effort, your organisation is still seeing you as order takers or training deliverers. I think this quick wins thing is the quickest road to knocking down those barriers, because what I see L&D people do all the time is they collect them, because they want to do this, this big presentation to these senior people. They want to have that ta-da moment where they say, look at all of the value that we brought to you. When there are a load of other kind of what I would say low-hanging fruit that you could have done earlier. So a couple of things that we did straight away. The minute LXP was turned on, we could see what time of day people were engaging with our content, and we've not had that view before. So we started changing the times of day that we dropped content to meet that data metric, and it resulted in a spike of engagement. we started playing in terms of taking risks, Ian. We played with our tone of voice in our email and our comms. So there were some comms that we sent. It was quite risque for our business. We became quite tongue in cheek. We knew that would make some senior stakeholders a little bit uncomfortable, but we knew a kind of our boots on the ground people would love it because that's how they talk with their friends.
Yeah.
And that immediately we saw a spike in engagement. So rather than collecting those quick wins, we played with them, we took the risk, and we immediately shared the impact and the value that was having, rather than collecting them all. You know, I shared this with Ian on a call earlier. A mentor of mine once said to me that people get low-hanging fruit wrong, because what you're not doing with low-hanging fruit, you're not making a fruit salad. The point is not to collect the fruit, then to prepare the fruit, then have a nice dish to present. The point of low-hanging fruit is to pick it and eat it straight away. So yeah, don't hold on to them, grab them and share them as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I love that so much. That is actually going to be used a lot. I think I'm going to have to steal it for future.
I mean, I stole it from my mentor, so steal with pride. That's the L&D industry, Ian. We all steal from each other.
And I think we talked about this earlier. As the final one is not identifying the challenges. Like I said, I've been running learning analytics specific projects now for about 6 years, and unfortunately have witnessed a number of scenarios where people would invest a lot of time into going and building integrations, buying the right tools, changing processes, and not really calling out like what could make things go wrong, and being 12 months down the line, having spent, I wouldn't like to say how many tens of thousands of dollars to then realize that what they now want to do doesn't work, or they didn't really understand the metrics they wanted or the problems that they were trying to solve early on. And the mindset was, well, let's collect all of the data now, and once we've got it in 18 months time, then we'll figure out what we want to do. I think if you're asking yourself the question, or saying, oh, we're not ready for that yet, or we don't have enough data, this is the time to start having those conversations about planning, because now get it right now, so you don't spend years or months or however long collecting all of this information and doing all of this work around the subject before you start recognizing what it is that you actually want to achieve in the end. So a few just tips for success. Hopefully everyone's picked up on them today, but collaboration is really key. Getting those different viewpoints. Don't particularly if you're a senior person on the call today, don't be the person that just decides everything and expects everyone else to tag along. Make sure you get a range of ideas and thoughts, and perhaps our workshop idea is a good way to do that. Identify
I think
the
that's
challenges.
really clear. That's really key, Ian. When you talk about collaboration, as an L&D professionals, facilitate that collaboration.
Yes,
a lot of the time, we thought we were collaborating because we're always having conversations with our stakeholders. We're always asking them what they think and what's important. But by putting them through those workshops, they think about things in a deeper, different way than they hadn't before. So deliberately deciding to facilitate collaboration rather than just trying to encourage it was really, really value adding for us.
Yes, I think, and we could probably almost change the language here. Actually, be deliberate about that collaboration. I think is very key. Be clear on the ownership. I think, those we talk about players in the game. Understanding, who those people are. Where the challenges exist. How involved they should or shouldn't be in the project. Do they just need to be informed about what's going on, or do they actually need to be physically getting their hands dirty and building stuff? Work that out early on. Be experimental. I think that's a big one. We've talked a lot about it. Test, measure, change things, and it doesn't have to be massive changes. Matty gave a great example there. You can just adjust the time of day, see what happens. Change the language, remove a video. Do small little incremental changes, see what difference it makes. Is it positive or is it a negative trait?
We literally even played with moving things on a page.
Exactly
the same information, we just put it in a different place on the page.
And try to be curious with these things and see what happens. And I would always encourage people to try where they can, and most systems you'll use, I know Thrive does, I know lots of other NMS or LXP providers have this idea of audiences or groups. Use those to create controls. Test something on one and do it in a different way on another and see which works better. It certainly helps make your case for how L&D have influenced these changes when you can provide examples of one thing working better than another. And then finally, and probably most importantly, is be patient. this does take time. This is a cultural shift. This is not something that you can just do in isolation. You know, organizations have to be involved in the idea of being data informed or data driven, however you want to think about it. It can't just be, you know, a couple of analysts like myself, you know, sat in a room creating dashboards or reports, and that's not what analytics is about. It's about, you know, a cultural shift to want to use data to support your assumptions, validate your ideas, and also, as I said, test the changes you make and see where they've worked or not.
And I think for us, this was the most difficult one, because it goes against all of your natural instincts as an L&D professional. Because part of testing and learning, you're going to get data that you don't like that you see. You're going to get problems arise. You're going to see things that aren't working, and you're going to immediately want to fix those. But then obviously the minute you cut that data stream off, or you make a change, you're then in a different territory, and you've not really gathered all of the insight that you potentially could have. So what we've had to stop, well, we have to kind of slow ourselves down, but also be much more explicitly clear with our stakeholders outside of the learning team that, you know, we're gonna try all this until this date, and then we're going to look at it. And it doesn't matter the problems that come out in that trial, because that's the point. So don't worry if you hear about these problems that we're not immediately fixing, because that's not the purpose of this work. It's it's to pursue an overall more value-adding goal. So it's really, really hard, but it's really important.
Yeah, and it's a good one that I think you use the term solutionizing, and funnily enough, that's so prior to being an L&D, it was something that my old CTO used to say to me, and I would come to him with these problems sometimes. And in certain situations, you go, no, you're missing the problem. You're solutionizing. You're just trying to solve everything that's coming up in front of you, not understanding the real thing and taking that time to think it through. You know, to the point I can remember him saying, you know, think harder, in which, you know, we can question his management style as much as we want, but the reality was true is that you do have to, you know, have that focus, be patient, and really focus on a core problem, and not just everything that comes up, just go, right, fix that now, fix that, and be distracted.
I think when you're looking at data, what you're doing there is you're listening to your organization. And I remember my previous mentor with the fruit salad, they loved all their little phrases. Another one that he used to say to me was, you know, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. So you should be listening to this organization twice as much as you're talking to it. So we should be testing and learning and looking at data twice as much as we are at solutionizing. And I think that balance is probably significantly off for most L&D professionals, myself included.
Yes. Very good. Examine the team culture as well. Make sure it's safe to make mistakes. Don't penalise for experiments fail. Yeah, that's really good. So, Kath there, brilliant. So I think you have to examine the team culture too. Make it safe to make mistakes. Don't penalise for experiments that fail. Yeah, I think that's very true. I think there can be a bit of a fear created from failure. And we see that all the time, you know, people worrying about, you know, if they do make a change, what happens if it doesn't work? You know, how are they going to be penalised for that? Are they going to be held to account for it? And again, yes, it's a massive cultural shift that needs to happen there, and it can be really challenging.
Can I, you've not asked me to do this, Ian, but just to give Thrive a little bit of a plug here, because I think that problem that Kath just mentioned around failure, psychological safety, permission to make mistakes, all of that is probably the key problem in business at the minute. It's probably the biggest thing that holds your talent back. And we also slightly had this issue, particularly when it came to learning. And by implementing Thrive, we've kind of ripped the band-aid off, because we've immediately enabled all of our people to own and share their own content. So by having a system that allowed people to build, share, own their own learning content, they are connecting and teaching with each other. And that made a lot of our stakeholders nervous, because they didn't have the quality control, or they didn't have the sight of everything. But what we are helping the business understand is they're all teachable moments. Even if there is a mistake, you can learn an awful lot from that. So we're deliberately enabling people to experiment more, and in a lot of areas, hoping that there are failures and that things don't quite land, because you extract a lot of value out of that. So if you have that challenge of experimentation and permission, Thrive is a really good practical tool to help that culture start to change in your business.
There's going to be so many quotes that you're going to get pushed for.
And they did not ask me to say that. That just came into my head.
As I say, this is recorded, so there's going to be sound bites everywhere, I think. That's brilliant. Thank you. So I'm going to also, look to Matt for this, because we were trying to really come up with what are we really trying to say, like a one line here, and I have to give credit to Matty for the top line. So over to you. matter.
Yeah, I guess this is, the question in the webinar: how do you really measure your impact? And for me, it's ignore all of those LinkedIn influencers that are convincing you that you're falling short because you don't have this fancy dashboard, or you don't have this silver bullet or perfect set of reports. True measurement of learning impact is an iterative, collaborative process of testing and learning that is constantly evolving and ongoing. You will never land on that learning report that demonstrates your value. It will be forever evolving and ongoing. That's true measurement. And you're right in your last line there, Ian, that the first step really is for your learning professionals to change their mindset and how they think about that before they go shopping for any kind of partnership or tool. Yeah. But again, another plug: if you are struggling with your mindset shift or where to start, Data Lab are a very good partner to help you. When I shop, I'm a very high maintenance shopper. Because I've been in this game a while and everybody sells you the dream. So I very rarely look at products, I look at people. I think, whose calls are going to be added to my diary am I going to dread attending versus who am I going to want to work with? And the way in with Data Lab was just because I liked you and the team. The product we could evolve together.
Yeah,
it was more about whether we like the partnership and whether we like the way you thought and whether you could challenge our thinking, and you have.
That's good. No, it's been a really, really good partnership, and particularly good for Data Lab as a new service and a set of ideas that we kind of came to the table with, and actually Thrive, a massive credit giving me the opportunity to try and create this service to try and help L&D teams kind of move sort of towards the next step. And as well, I guess on the first step is not a fancy tool. It's also the opportunity to say where I do believe that you should be trying to have analysts on your team, whether that's through third-party services like Data Lab or on your own. But don't just expect that putting someone who can work with data and is comfortable working with data isn't going to solve your problems, right? You still have to make sure that you have a reason for doing these things and understanding what the analyst will be working with, because they are simply a component in the wider strategy, not the individual or individuals with the magic wands that will give you all of these amazing insights that will change the world. You have to do that collaboration piece as a team and make sure that these things are all structured and well outlined. So a little bit of Data Lab, and Matty's done an amazing plug for that. But yes, the Data Lab service that I run with a number of analysts we have on the team is very much a customer facing service, as hopefully you've kind of got the picture of that now, and really designed around helping customers to move forward, whether it's creating the strategy or perhaps just enabling certain areas. It really depends on what the individual's needs are. Some customers are more experienced or more mature and have different problems. We really try and fit in and work with whatever those problems are, and create and support these strategies. Work with the visualization element as well as the workshopping, and really on hand in quite a real close partnership to be available to be the people that can help carry out a lot of this work, enable some of those ideas, and provide, I guess, actionable insights, for want of a better phrase, to the team, and also really focusing on that mindset shift and changing perhaps what L&D have done typically, or what we see a lot of the time, where we're sort of stuck in our ways a little bit. So of course, if you want to learn more about that, go to the website. We obviously have some collateral, and of course reach out to me on LinkedIn as well.
And just quickly to add on that as well, from a practical perspective, there'll be people on this call that are thinking this sounds great, but price, commercially, I won't use the word cheap because that devalues the product. Yes. But it's very commercially accessible for most organizations, because I think a lot of organizations, unless you're very forward thinking, you're not going to get the internal headcount for an L&D data analyst. No. But this is a way that you can add the value of an L&D data analyst at a much more commercially accessible route.
Yes, and it's by design, right? We like I said, most people don't have that additional budget for someone who's simply going to work with the data. So we made the Data Lab incredibly competitive from a financial perspective, so that we can move people through those stages without having to go, right, we have to have massive budget conversations about bringing on analysts here, which of course, if you're going to go and invest in a team, most of you may have looked at that already. It's not going to be cheap necessarily, but the Data Lab service is really designed so that it can be affordable, and hopefully then help change that business mindset. We go, okay, well, we actually do need to invest in analytics because it's making a difference, and those budget conversations hopefully become easier. And really the legacy of Data Lab hopefully is that we change the way the L&D industry thinks about learning analytics, and makes it part of the core L&D function, hopefully in years to come. So a little bit of time, just a few minutes at the end for questions. Is there any questions that we have that we want to answer? Also, just while we've got the last little bit of time left, Matty and I are going to be at Learning Technologies on the 5th of May at 11 a.m. So if you're there, do come see us. We are going to be focusing on this topic, framed in a slightly different way, but similar type of content. But of course, we will be there in person as well. So if you have other questions and you want to chat, do come see us. But any questions? And so, Laura,
Ian,
yes.
Yeah. I've got a couple of questions here, and thank you both of you for that amazing session. That was really, really insightful. We've still got plenty of people logged on, which is always a good sign that we're hitting the mark. So thanks again. We do have a couple of questions. I'm conscious of time, so if anyone has asked a question and we don't get a chance to answer it quickly now, then we will be in touch afterwards, so we can continue the conversation, no problem. But so I just wanted to pull out a couple. So one question we had here, Ian, I think. For you, I like the test and adapt approach. How can we approach this if we're very light on data, and where do we start?
Yeah, I think the good one is that control the controllables, right? I think Matty's quote there is the best one. Is that being light on data is absolutely okay. I think figure out what you have and what does it influence, and part of that identification of problems might be that, okay, we're not able to collect the data that we need. So that advisory conversation that you have, so rather than jumping straight into going, hey, we need to analyze this data, if it isn't useful, it doesn't tell you the things that you need to ask, then your questions you should be asking is like, well, how do we collect the data that we need? Now, where can we get it from? Who do we need to be involved? What's our argument for going and collecting more data? So that workshop session, so that you can understand that, so that you can go back to the business and say, look, we want to be able to do this, but we're unable to because of, is probably your first step, rather than just thinking about what can we do with a limited set of data, I would say.
And if you're testing and learning, if you're experimenting, you'll create your own data streams.
Yes,
so if you're going to play with what time of day am I going to send out content to people, the impact of that is a new set of data that you may not have had before. So if you're light, think about what you can control and what data stream you can create yourself.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, creating your own data streams. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, as you start to change things, you will get new insights, even as there's sort of small little quick wins, small changes. All of these things are good. And test your assumptions, like before you do it, go, okay, we think this might be the best way to change something. Test it, see if you were right or not. That is a really good approach that you can take to these kind of problems.
Brilliant, great answer, thank you. And maybe I'll just call out one more question just before we finish up. For both of you. So someone has asked, can you give me some more suggestions of the quick wins that you referred to near the start of the session?
Well, for us, I'll go first, and then I'll let you round it off. For us, it was around learning engagement was our lowest hanging fruit. That was something we could absolutely control, was how, or influence, I should say, into how engaged people are with our learning. So we really broke that down. And actually looked at it. We did a session with the chief marketing officer at Thrive, actually, around tips that you get from marketeers around campaigning learning. So we looked at who our personas were, the technologies we had available, where do our people hang out, what time of day, what type of content. We looked at all of those different things that could turn the dial ever so slightly on learning engagement, but collectively result in quite a seismic shift. So for us, we went after the lowest hanging fruit. The easiest was learning engagement, and that had quite a significant impact quite quickly.
Yeah, I think we've covered lots of them. Just to round those things off, like you said, there's the little changes, the little adjustments you can make. And Matt used the expression, creating your own data streams. I think that's the good way to get the quick wins. And always be mindful that try to make sure that when you're asking yourself the question, is this contributing towards our wider goal? It's a good way to kind of keep you in check, really. If you to stop you from going on that solutionizing route where you see something and then you go down a rabbit hole, bring it back to that original objective. Is this contributing? Is actually getting people more engaged with the platform helping us? Well, perhaps because you've probably perhaps created a training program of some description. So yes, it is. If it's going off on some other tangent, be careful that you don't just completely distract yourself and end up focusing on some other area of the business and then ignoring what you'd worked hard to kind of prepare for.
Wonderful. Well, we're at 12 now, so I think that brings us to the end of the session. Thanks again to both of you. That was really, really insightful. We'll be in touch with everyone after in the next couple of days with the recording and some additional content for you. And do feel free to get in touch with us if you have any other questions. So thank you very much.
Right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.